The Rosetta Stone cracked open the world of ancient Egypt, helping us decode hieroglyphs and unlock the secrets of the pharaohs. The Minoan script was a total mystery until Michael Ventris cracked it, and then there's the Maya, whose sudden collapse baffled historians for years. These are ancient historical mysteries that have been solved. In 1799, a soldier working with Napoleon's forces in Egypt came across something which came to be known as the Rosetta Stone. The stone slab had inscriptions in 3 different scripts: Greek, Demotic, Egyptian hieroglyphs. Little did they know, but this would turn out to be the key to unlocking the mystery of ancient Egypt. For years, no one could make sense of the hieroglyphs, but the Rosetta Stone gave scholars something to work with. Thanks to Jean-Francois Champollion, a French scholar, the puzzle was finally solved in 1822. Champollion figured out that the hieroglyphs weren't just pictures, they were a combination of phonetic symbols and ideograms. Basically, this was a way of writing sounds, a lot like our own alphabet. So once they figured that out, it opened up the entire world of ancient Egypt, from its kings to its gods, art and rituals. Without the Rosetta Stone, we probably wouldn't have the understanding we do today of the ancient Egyptians. It was the Rosetta Stone that gave Egyptology the push it needed to transform from guesswork into a real detailed history. The Minoans were a pretty advanced civilization that lived on the island of Crete from around 3000 to 1450 BCE. They weren't exactly Greek in the way we think of ancient Greece, but their culture heavily influenced the Greeks who came after them. They built these massive palace complexes and also made some really nice looking art. And the Minoans were skilled sailors with a huge trade network, which helped them dominate the Mediterranean for a time. They also used a form of writing known as Linear A, which modern scholars couldn't decipher for years. It wasn't until the 50s that another form of script called Linear B was discovered on these clay tablets. And this script was used by the Mycenaeans, who were a Greek-speaking civilization that came after the Minoans, around 1450 BCE. Linear B was actually a Greek adaptation of the earlier Minoan Linear A. A guy named Michael Ventris cracked the code in 1952, figuring out that Linear B was an early form of Greek, used mostly for record keeping. Basically, it was like their business language. This was huge. Not only did it reveal how the Mycenaeans communicated, but also gave us a peek into how the Minoans might have written. Sadly, we still don't know exactly what Linear A says, but deciphering Linear B was definitely a huge step forward. The ancient Maya lived in what is now Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and Honduras, building huge cities with pyramids and temples. They were masters of astronomy, math, and even had an intricate writing system. But then, around the 9th century, things started going south, and they just disappeared. Well, they didn't totally disappear, but the huge city-states collapsed, leaving behind massive, empty cities like Tikal. And for a long time, no one really knew why. For years, historians and archaeologists were left wondering. Some thought it was because of overpopulation or invasions, but there was nothing concrete. But then studies started showing that the climate would have played a huge role. Turns out the Maya were dealing with a massive drought. Crops failed, water sources dried up, and life became pretty miserable for the Maya. Combine that with the already fragile political structure, and it was the perfect storm. Recent research, though, shows that the Maya didn't just vanish, they adapted. The ones in the northern Yucatan region did pretty well, while the southern cities collapsed. So while the mighty city-states fell, the Maya people carried on in different ways. The mystery isn't fully solved, but the drought theory really started to stick as more evidence popped up about climate change during that time. For the longest time, no one really knew who King Tutankhamun's parents were. We all knew Tut, of course, the famous pharaoh with the gold mask, who seems to be Egypt's most famous ruler, even though he didn't really do much ruling himself. He died young, at around 18, and left behind a whole pile of artifacts, which is why we still talk about him today. But the whole who's his parents question was a really big one. Was he really the son of the powerful pharaoh Akhenaten? Well, in 2010, scientists used modern DNA testing to examine Tut's mummified remains, and eventually they confirmed that yes, Akhenaten was indeed Tut's father. They also found that Tut's mother was Akhenaten's sister. So good luck making a Disney cartoon about King Tut now. As gross as this was, though, it did make sense. Explains all the health problems King Tut had. He had deformities and disabilities, which were likely a result of inbreeding. The story of Troy has been one of the most legendary tales in history, thanks to Homer's Iliad, which immortalized the Trojan War, the epic siege of Troy, and of course the famous Trojan horse. For centuries, people thought of Troy as nothing more than a myth. But in the 19th century, a guy named Heinrich Schliemann came along and decided to put an end to the debate once and for all. Schliemann, a German businessman turned archaeologist, was just obsessed with the idea that Troy actually existed, and he searched the Turkish coast, convinced that he was going to find the city buried somewhere. In 1870, after years of digging, he finally came across what seemed to be the ruins of a city at a site called Hesarlik in modern-day Turkey. He found massive city walls and burned layers of debris. It seemed like this place had been destroyed in a way that matched Homer's descriptions. Of course, not all of Schliemann's conclusions were taken at face value, and his methods were a little questionable, but the location he found is now widely accepted as the site of ancient Troy, and excavations that have happened since have found even more proof. So yeah, the legend of Troy turns out it might have actually happened. The Etruscans were one of ancient Italy's most influential civilizations, often seen as the mysterious predecessors to the Romans. But for a long time, historians couldn't agree on where they came from, mainly because they didn't leave behind a clear written record in a language that anyone could easily understand. Some thought they came from the Italian peninsula, others believed they were migrants from the east, specifically from Anatolia, modern-day Turkey again. The truth is, it's a little of both, but genetic studies in recent years have given us a much clearer picture. Scientists found that the Etruscans were likely indigenous to central Italy. In fact, studies of ancient DNA from burial sites in Tuscany shows that their genetic makeup closely matched the populations of that area. There was some influence from the eastern Mediterranean, especially through trade and contact with other cultures, but the Etruscans were not really foreign invaders. They were deeply rooted in Italy. The Paracus candelabra is a giant, mysterious figure carved into the side of a hill in Peru. If you've ever seen it, you probably ask the same thing everyone else does. What is this thing? What was it for? Well, this massive geoglyph, shaped like a giant candlestick, is over 595 feet long and is visible from the sea. So why go to all that trouble to carve something so huge into the earth? Well, for a while, archaeologists had a lot of theories. Some thought it was a symbol for some ancient religion, maybe connected to the Paracus people who lived in the area over 2,000 years ago. Others wondered if it had to do with astronomy, but the more you dig into it, the more it looks like the geoglyph was created to guide ancient sailors. The most widely accepted idea today is that it was a sort of landmark, a beacon visible from the sea to help navigators find their way along the coast. It's around 1200 BCE, and the world's most powerful civilizations, Egypt, the Hittites, and the Mycenaeans, are suddenly starting to fall apart. Cities are being abandoned, trade routes are cut off, and societies begin to crumble into dust. What happened? The event that historians call the Bronze Age collapse wiped out major civilizations and kicked off this dark age in the Mediterranean that lasted for hundreds of years. But figuring out exactly what caused it has always been kind of tough. Experts figure the collapse was caused by a combination of things though. First, there was the climate. A prolonged drought hit the eastern Mediterranean, leading to food shortages, of course making it way harder for people to survive. Then you've got invasions by the so-called sea peoples, groups of marauders who attacked coastal cities, and no one really knows who they were or where they came from. Some think they were displaced by the same climate changes, looking for a new place to settle. On top of that, there was the economy. Trade networks were disrupted, so resources became scarce. Combine all these factors, climate, invasions, and the economy failing, and you've got the perfect recipe for a massive shift. The Philistines have been painted as the classic bad guys in biblical stories, especially in the tale of David and Goliath. But beyond their infamous role as the giant-slaying enemies of the Israelites, there's a real mystery about where the Philistines actually come from, or came from rather. Were they just another group of ancient people, or was there something more unusual about their origins? Well, for years, historians thought the Philistines were just another local group in the ancient Near East, but through excavations in their major cities in Israel, it's become clear that the Philistines were not originally from the area. Turns out they were actually part of those so-called sea peoples, who would have likely come from places like Greece or maybe Anatolia, which is now, again, modern-day Turkey. Around the 12th century BCE, these sea peoples, including the Philistines, settled along the coast of what is now Israel and Gaza, and eventually formed their own culture. They developed unique architecture and weapons that were different from those of their neighbors. You don't need me to tell you that Stonehenge is one of the most iconic and mysterious monuments in the world, but today I'm going to be specific specifically talking about what are called the blue stones. They're the smaller stones at Stonehenge. Now, why are these smaller stones interesting though? Well, we know that Stonehenge was built in stages, but the blue stones are totally different from the massive sandstone slabs or sarsens that form the outer ring of Stonehenge. They're smaller, and they may not look blue with the naked eye, but they do have a bluish tint when broken apart or wet. Turns out the blue stones didn't come from anywhere near Stonehenge. They were transported from the Preseli Hills in Wales, about 150 miles away, something that would have been no small feat back in the day. These stones must have been pretty special to the people who built Stonehenge if they were willing to lug them all that way. A popular theory is that they were believed to have mystical or healing properties. With all that said, I've been your host James, and I'll catch you, yes you specifically, in the next video.